January 15th, 1947. Los Angeles, California, the city of angels. A city built on dreams, where thousands of young people arrived every year, desperate to become stars. But beneath the glamour of Hollywood, beneath the studio lights and the red carpets, there was a darkness that most people never saw. A city of cheap boarding houses, failed auditions, and broken promises. A city where a young woman could disappear, and nobody would notice for days. On this particular winter morning, a mother named Betty Bersinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter along South Norton Avenue in the Leimert Park neighborhood. The street was quiet. New homes were being built in the area. Vacant lots sat between finished houses, overgrown with weeds. And then Betty saw something in the grass. Something pale. Something she first mistook for a broken department store mannequin, discarded and left in 2 pieces in the weeds. But as she got closer, the shape became clearer. The details became sharper. And the reality hit her like a freight train. It was not a mannequin. It was a woman, cut cleanly in half, laid out on the ground as if someone had arranged her there with deliberate, horrible care. Betty grabbed her daughter and ran. And the horror of what she saw that morning would haunt Los Angeles for the next 80 years. The victim was Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, born in Hyde Park, Boston, Massachusetts, on July 29th, 1924. She was the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her father built miniature golf courses for a living and did well for a time, until the Great Depression wiped him out. In 1929, Cleo Short abandoned his family. He parked his car near a bridge, left behind evidence suggesting suicide, and vanished. The family believed he was dead. He wasn't. He had moved to California and started a new life. Elizabeth grew up in Medford, Massachusetts, raised by her mother. She was strikingly beautiful from a young age. Pale skin, dark black hair, piercing blue-gray eyes. She suffered from severe asthma and spent winters away from the cold Boston climate. At age 19, she moved to Vallejo, California, where she discovered that her father was alive and living nearby. Their reunion was brief and ugly. He wanted nothing to do with the family he had abandoned. So Elizabeth drifted through wartime California. She worked as a waitress, a cashier, a clerk at Camp Cook. She dated soldiers and airmen. She was arrested once in Santa Barbara for underage drinking. Friends described her as gentle, sweet, always impeccably dressed in black. She wore a Black Dahlia flower in her dark hair. She was chasing a Hollywood dream that had no intention of catching her back. What was done to Elizabeth Short's body was beyond anything the Los Angeles Police Department had ever encountered. She had been cut completely in half at the waist, a clean surgical bisection through the lumbar spine between the 2nd and 3rd vertebrae. Medical examiners noted the precision of the cut. It was not the work of a frenzied attacker. It was deliberate, careful, and demonstrated either medical knowledge or extensive experience with dissection. Her body had been drained of every drop of blood, completely exsanguinated. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, creating what is known as a Glasgow smile, or a Chelsea grin. There were ligature marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck, indicating she had been bound and restrained for hours, possibly days, before death. The cause of death was hemorrhage and shock from the facial lacerations, combined with blows to the head. She had been tortured while still alive. The body showed signs of forced ingestion of fecal matter. The coroner estimated she had been dead for approximately 10 hours before being placed at the lot. The body had been carefully washed and posed, arms raised above the head, legs spread, the 2 halves separated by exactly 12 inches. There was no blood at the scene whatsoever. This was not a place of murder. This was a place of display. The Los Angeles press descended on the case like vultures. This was 1947, the golden age of tabloid journalism, and the Black Dahlia murder was the biggest story any of them had ever seen. Reporters from the Herald Express, the Examiner, The Daily News and the Times swarmed the crime scene before the police could properly secure it. They trampled potential evidence. They bribed officers for photographs and details. And then a reporter from the Los Angeles Examiner did something extraordinary, even by the standards of that era. He called Elizabeth Short's mother, Phoebe, in Massachusetts. He told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest in Los Angeles, and he needed background information for a story. Phoebe, delighted, spent an hour on the phone providing personal details, family history, and anecdotes. Only after the reporter had everything he needed did he inform her that Elizabeth was actually dead. Murdered. The press gave Elizabeth a nickname that would outlast every other detail of the case. The Black Dahlia. Borrowed from a recent Alan Ladd film called The Blue Dahlia, combined with Elizabeth's well-known habit of wearing black. The name caught fire. It sold newspapers by the hundreds of thousands. And with that name, Elizabeth Short stopped being a real person. She became a character, a myth, a ghost story that Los Angeles would tell itself forever. The LAPD launched what became the largest murder investigation in the city's history up to that point. Captain Jack Donahoe of the Homicide Division assigned his best detectives. Harry Hansen and Finis Brown led the case. They would spend years on it. But from the very beginning, the investigation was compromised in ways that made solving the case almost impossible. The crime scene had been overrun by reporters and curious onlookers before forensics could process it. Tire tracks were destroyed. Potential footprints were trampled. Critical trace evidence was lost. And then came the confessions. Within the first week, more than 50 people walked into LAPD stations across the city and confessed to killing Elizabeth Short. Most were mentally ill. Some were attention seekers. Others were drunks who had read the newspaper and convinced themselves they might have done it. Each confession had to be investigated and eliminated. It consumed enormous resources. The real leads were buried under an avalanche of noise. Elizabeth's final days were pieced together painstakingly. She had been staying at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She was last seen in the hotel lobby on the evening of January 9th, 1947. 6 days before her body was found. Where she went after walking through those hotel doors, who she met, what happened in those missing 6 days, remains one of the greatest unsolved questions in American criminal history. Then, on January 24th, the killer made contact. A package arrived at the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner. The envelope was addressed in letters cut from newspapers and magazines, carefully pasted together. It read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." Inside the envelope was Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her Social Security card, her address book, business cards, photographs, and a luggage claim ticket. Everything had been soaked in gasoline to destroy fingerprints. The killer had been meticulous. One page had been carefully torn from the address book. Detectives believed that the missing page contained the killer's name or contact information. The luggage ticket led police to a suitcase at a Greyhound bus depot, but it contained only clothing and personal items, nothing that identified the killer. More communications followed in the weeks after. A postcard reading, "Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger." Another letter, "I will give up in Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." A package arrived containing a woman's black suede shoe and a handbag, believed to be Elizabeth's. Some of these were genuine communications from the killer. Others were likely hoaxes from the public, inspired by the frenzy. But despite the physical evidence, despite the taunting messages, the LAPD could not identify the sender. The gasoline had done its job perfectly. Over the decades, the list of suspects in the Black Dahlia case has grown long and tangled. Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner and theater operator, was among the first investigated. Elizabeth had stayed at a property he owned. His name appeared in her address book. He had a reputation for pursuing young women, but no physical evidence ever connected him to the murder. Robert Red Manley, the last known person to see Elizabeth alive, was polygraphed and interrogated extensively. He passed every test and was cleared. But the most compelling suspect emerged decades later. Dr. George Hill Hodel, a brilliant, wealthy Los Angeles physician, a man who ran in elite circles, who was friends with the surrealist photographer Man Ray, a man who was investigated by the LAPD in 1949 for the assault of his own teenage daughter. In 1950, the LAPD bugged Hodel's Hollywood home, the famous Sowden House. On the recordings, Hodel was heard saying, quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead," end quote. His own son, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD homicide detective, spent years building a case against his father, publishing multiple books accusing him of the murder. George Hodel had the surgical skill. He had the darkness. And shortly after the bugging, he fled to the Philippines and never returned. What made the Black Dahlia case unique in the annals of American crime was not just the brutality. It was the staging, the deliberate artistry of the crime. Elizabeth's body was posed in a way that investigators found deeply unsettling, not just because of the violence, but because it appeared to reference something. Some investigators have noted similarities between the positioning of the body and surrealist artwork from the 1920s and 30s, particularly the work of Man Ray. If George Hodel was the killer, this connection becomes chilling, as he was a known associate of Man Ray. The bisection itself was clean and precise. It required either medical training, experience with butchering, or knowledge of embalming. The body had been completely drained of blood, a process that takes hours and requires specific technique. The Glasgow smile was not random mutilation. It was a signature, a deliberate disfigurement with historical roots in gang violence and intimidation. And then there was the posing. The body was placed in a public location, visible from the street, arranged symmetrically and deliberately. This was not someone hiding evidence. This was someone exhibiting their work. Criminal profilers have compared the staging to what is now called a signature killer, someone for whom the killing itself is only part of the ritual. The presentation matters as much as the act. The Black Dahlia case has never been solved. It remains an open investigation with the LAPD, though no active detective has been assigned to it in decades. The case file is thousands of pages long. The original detectives, Harry Hansen and Finis Brown, both died without ever naming a definitive suspect publicly. Hansen reportedly believed he knew who did it, but could never prove it. He took that name to his grave. The case has become woven into the fabric of Los Angeles itself. James Elroy, whose own mother was murdered in Los Angeles when he was 10 years old, wrote a best-selling novel called The Black Dahlia in 1987. Brian De Palma directed a major Hollywood film in 2006. Podcasts, documentaries, television specials, and countless books have been produced. The Biltmore Hotel, where Elizabeth was last seen alive, still operates in downtown Los Angeles. Some guests ask about the girl in black who once stood in its lobby. The vacant lot on South Norton Avenue has long since been built over. A row of neat houses now sits where Elizabeth Short's body was found. Families live there. Children play in the yards. They walk over the spot where Betty Bersinger saw what she thought was a broken mannequin on a cold January morning nearly 80 years ago. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. She came to Los Angeles because she wanted to be somebody. She wanted to be seen, to walk through those Hollywood gates and come out the other side transformed. And in the cruelest possible irony, she got her wish. Not as the actress she dreamed of becoming, not as a star on the screen, but as a victim, a symbol, a name that would be known for nearly a century. The Black Dahlia. Her killer was never caught, never identified, never brought to justice. They walked away from that vacant lot in the early hours of January 15th, 1947, and disappeared into the endless grid of Los Angeles. Maybe they died decades later, their secret intact. Maybe they killed before. Maybe they killed again. We simply don't know. What we know is this. A young woman with dark hair and blue eyes and a flower in her hair came to the City of Angels looking for a dream, and the city consumed her. This has been Cold Vault. If these stories stay with you, subscribe, because some cases should never be forgotten, and some questions should never stop being asked.